Thank you so much, Sharon. I'm happy to open that up to questions now if people in the audience have anything that they'd like to ask these artists. If not, I can fulfill my lifelong dream of being Oprah Winfrey and begin. So, Daniele, I wanted to ask you, and Beth as well, in creating this notion of a really customized theater for one experience, did you think about how you wanted the participants to essentially socialize with the information you gave them afterwards? Was there an intended impact that you meant to have on their lives after they experienced this? Or was it intended to be a sort of contained impact?
I think that actually the work is always like on the line of many times like the audience members is confused whether the piece is over or not. In the sense that since you're taken care of and you move, from place to place and you have different encounters with different artists, then, for example, sometimes we leave the audience in another location and nobody arrives. But you're in a location that is highly, populated in that moment. There could be a train station, so there is actually lots of people, and it's an invitation, again, to relate with the environment differently. And since you've talked to, strangers throughout the piece, we invite you to keep talking to strangers. And that I would say is probably like the one, if you want to say, message that there is in the piece, because other than that, it's only like being present. It requires the presence of the performer with their body, and at the same time, since the audience is transformed into actor, it requires the performance of the body participation, almost if they were an actors of the audience members as well. And that's why I think also in the VR, when in the thing that we collaborated and created together, we actually didn't want to have a plot or something that was actually told, but we wanted you, the audience, since you were receiving mostly in that moment, to recompose the puzzle of the story that you could have interpreted in different ways.
Beth, did you hear my question initially? She's smiling. She's a lovely smile. Blink if they have you. Okay.
Internet connection in the table.
Okay. We'll come back to you, Beth. Oh, you're with us. You're moving now. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you, yeah. I don't think the connection's totally stable.
Okay. Jane, I really loved your presentation too, because you really laid it out there in terms of like, this stuff just was very challenging and didn't work. And did you want to talk at all about what you're hoping to experiment next in terms of working with the technology further? Because you mentioned sort of a hopefulness at the end.
Yeah, I guess very similar to what you were speaking of is how I've produced as well one-person performances, one-audience performances, and there is an unsustainability to that, and how this could be used and allow performance to run over longer periods of time. I'm also training in something called somatic experiencing, which is a trauma resolution work, that one of the things when we are under stress or encounter stressors is that our pupils narrow and our focus goes in one direction to be aware of that stress. And I feel like VR is a way that we can literally to the most basic encourage movement of a person, and how by putting the work in their hands in a way that they have access to the timing, or as you said, like repeating, that there's infinite ways to watch it. really creates a way to have a deeper sense of safety with work and ultimately safety with relationship to others, and using VR as a way to pattern new ways of relationship to both others and people and to place or our city.
Are there any audience questions? Yes. Right in the middle. Okay. Right, yeah, right there.
My question is for Jane. I'm curious why you chose VR for this project. Do you think, like, was it the best medium for it? And if it was, why? Or was the motivation more just to interact with that kind of technology and explore it?
Yeah, there was a few reasons. I had met Ian about a year prior, and as I said, I've done a lot of site-specific work that was one audience focused. So when I started to speak with Ian about what he had been doing, it seemed like not that far of a jump from what I had been doing already, and I still feel that. There is just a lot more to learn. I also in that time moved to Toronto from the States, but want to still have a presence in the art community there. So this funding opportunity came up, and it felt like a way that I could be making and part of work that's being made there without living there full time. So the project was rehearsed in about 2 weeks and filmed very quickly, about 3 days.
Right in the middle there?
Revenue that you're needing to get in order to develop your platforms, and I'm curious how they maybe differ, if some of you are using more open source versus I'm just about done now.
So
using open source versus
That's a good question.
doing it from scratch, the code.
So the question was, the projects in this panel have a range of timelines, and questions about revenue and infrastructure to support the creation of that work, if they could talk a little bit about that.
I personally operate on a project base. I hope I'm answering the question. I operate on a project base and I produce my own work, and so it's always finding a number of partners that can sometimes provide with space, sometimes with little money, and I actually have the tendency of intending like a series of shows becoming like one larger project. So even like the process of rehearsing a show, it becomes like it's work that it's right now, but it's also works that can enter in future pieces of mine. And it's pretty independent and small scale. And lots of times on my end, of course I pay myself, but it's really a work of labor. Of love at the same time. A work of labor, of course, but of love too.
Intentional shit. Did you have a follow-up back there?
For a single piece? I'm in between 60 and 80,000. It depends like what kind of like projects we're looking at, and sometimes it varies. Like it really varies like from project to project. Sometimes it's only a few thousands of dollars. Yeah.
I think to answer that question too, like each of these projects didn't necessarily have their own app with it. So Beth, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So I wanted to direct this question to Beth too, because you were talking about it as Bury the Wren as a research project. We had originally had a question about it being intended as a theater for one, and whether or not you had some focused intention coming out of that. But the other question we were just hearing now is about sources of revenue and budgeting for these types of experiences.
Okay, I think I got all of it. Um, Can you just repeat the first one of the internet project?
So the initial question, there were two questions that we wanted to hear from you about, which was the intention as an outcome of Theater for One, and then what is your infrastructure and revenue structure for supporting this kind of work, if you can hear me.
Yeah, I got that.
Okay.
Great, thank you. I'll start with number two. So number two, in terms of the infrastructure, because this was a research project and a thesis project at the University of Calgary, we were supported by the university and the Department of Drama and the School for the Performing Arts. So a lot of the technology was there. I would say if I were to cost it, it would have been about $15,000 to $20,000 in technology and resources, and then the ever-changing fees. I mean, we had an equity actor, and Neil and I, and 2 dramaturgs. So 60,000 is probably about right. In terms of the intention, we've come out of it certainly with to explore expanding the one-on capacity, and can we continue to have the same kind of intimacy and the same kind of storytelling as we expand the technology, because we know we can support multiple so-called players, multiple participants. It would just require a different approach to it. And so the intention going into it was very much a one-on-one. It was inspired by theater replacements, bio boxes. It was inspired by instant performance. And the goal was never to do anything more than one, but we certainly come out of it and to also move it into other platforms, make it more portable, and make it more accessible for one person.
Thank you. Sharon, did you want to Sharon and Jane talk about the funding and infrastructure for your projects as well?
Yeah, sure. Mine was heavily collaborated with Toasterlab in that sense on the app side, which was amazing. So it was more of like a case study for Toasterlab, so I didn't have to deal with that financial side, which was a blessing. And for the timeline, I was there for a week before the PQ started, which I felt was like a short amount of time, but it was sufficient enough because I got a lot of content that I was happy with. And I was able to control the experience in the sense that there was one recording per location, so it doesn't overwhelm the participant with like so many archival sounds. To do it again or to explore it further in new locations, I would definitely try to expand my timeline and offer a longer period for myself to explore this space, so weather becomes more of an impact and seasons and time and everything changing.
Public Square received a $10,000 grant, and that was it. There was no ticket prices. It was a free, that was part of the grant stipulation, was it was free. And the dancers were paid below living wage to participate, but did also as a labor of love, and that money went really fast.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the tricky things is that you can, what I'm hearing too about these projects is that you can use them as a foundation to iterate again, even though, and build on the money that you've already spent. So it might not necessarily be like one fixed amount that you can say is per project necessarily. Were there other audience questions before we, yeah.
I'm just curious about Toasterlab, and it kind of is similar to this question because there's either the idea of everyone having to create their own apps and so forth, but I'm curious about your guys' idea to start putting things in one place and having open source access to those technologies.
Yeah. So I think something that's like a core value of what we're doing with Toasterlab, and that's really supported by the Digital Strategy Fund, which we received from the Canada Council for the Arts, is that we are hoping to not only create open source code for a platform for other artists to use too. We have sort of micro grants and funding to support and essentially move projects forward using the technology and the expertise that we already have. And we don't necessarily intend for the symposium to be like a day-long commercial for Toasterlab, which I guess I'm fine with if we do it that way. But like one of our values is to essentially impart this technology, which can be kind of a high barrier, even though the individual pieces of technology aren't necessarily like very expensive to buy. Like the expertise in using them and the expertise in coding is hard to come by, like in a short amount of time if you have a limited budget. So that's kind of the model we're working on. Yes, Andrew and Ian? Yes.
Sorry, I also don't want to make this a commercial for anything, but two of the projects were actually built using the map tool, which I mentioned in the beginning. So nice to meet you, Sharon, finally. We've never met. And thank you very much for the endorsement. But we are actually, like, part of our mission is to try to solve, again, at least some of this problem. It's a really big problem. Yeah. But to see if we can, as Justine said, scaffold some of this technology out so that we can, of course, lower the cost, but also build on our own expertise as a community. Because we encounter this technology, and then I'll stop talking, but we encounter this technology in a very different way than the industry ever will. What we're doing with it and what we're pushing is completely different. So.
Exactly right. We have time for one more question before we break for lunch. Will it be you? Will it be me? Yeah, you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, if it wasn't for Ian and Toasterlab, like I wouldn't have even been able to play around, like let alone make a project. Like that learning curve of just even getting the video from the camera to a computer, and then the massive amount of time it takes to edit. Yeah,
and I think that's what we're promoting here too, is the collaborative aspect, which you wouldn't necessarily find in a like sort of commercial gaming environment that's competitive and for profit. Although money's nice, more money is always good. Anything else? Well, I want to say thank you so much to our panel and to Beth for joining us from far away, and to Daniele and Jane and Sharon for speaking about their really exciting and inspiring projects today. So thank you.